Clemson 31, Florida State 14. The Tigers now 9-1 and officially Atlantic Division champions and marching on to the ACC championship game. But it was not easy despite the final score. We bring in Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC, breaking down Clemson's bid to get back to the college football playoff. Mike, how you doing tonight?
Well, Mark, how are you?
Huge game and a huge day of college football, as we will get to some of the other games around the ACC. But we start with the biggest one, at least at this point of the day, with the Tigers winning 31-14. Couple Kelly Bryant fumbles inside the 5-yard line in the first half kept it close. Statistically, not very much of a game, but Florida State certainly had its chances and showed up and made it a game.
Yeah, it was kind of an anomaly with the Kelly Bryant fumbles for obvious reasons. He's been a guy who's done a pretty good job taking care of the football this year. But the one interesting thing about this game, I think, from the Clemson standpoint is, the defense, for as well as it played, on the flip side, the offense just couldn't put the ball in the end zone for everything that the defense was doing that was positive. They just couldn't get anything going offensively. I mean, they'd move it, down inside the red zone. They just couldn't punch it in the end zone. It was just really interesting game to watch. I think if you're a Florida State fan, you're happy with the performance. I think overall, obviously, Florida State had their chances to win the football game, but Mark, you and I were texting a little bit there as the second half was kind of wearing on there. Mid-fourth quarter, you texted me and you said, this is the Florida State team that we were kind of expecting. And I think that was, extremely clear from what was happening there late in the second half. Obviously, the double reverse flea flicker pass that ended up going for a touchdown. Obviously, that was a wild play that pulled Florida State close. The Seminoles defense forces a fumble there. Then James Blackman gives the ball right back to Clemson. Travis Etienne, of course, scores a rushing touchdown a few plays later. And that's really been the story of Florida State's season. It's, for every good thing they've done, they've also shot themselves in the foot. And that was just kind of the epitome of the season, that 5 or 6 play stretch where they force a fumble. All of a sudden, it's a 3-point game with 5 minutes left, and they're on Clemson's side of the 50 to, James Blackman throws a pick. Travis Etienne then takes the ball to the house there a couple plays later from the running back position, and Clemson really puts the game away. That's been the season for Florida State. They've had plenty of opportunities, and they've just kind of squandered them. And that's really what happened here late. Clemson's doing this thing that's extremely troubling. They're letting teams back into games, and many times it's teams that don't belong on the same field as they do. Obviously, they let Syracuse hang around. Syracuse goes out and beats them. They do this against Florida State this week. They had an interesting game against Wake Forest where they jumped out to a 28-0 lead, then Wake Forest made it a game late. There are just instances where Clemson just isn't really putting teams away and stepping on their throat as much as you'd like. And Clemson's really going to have to do that here down the stretch. Obviously, they have a big showdown now in the ACC championship game. That's all set now. Was pretty much set in stone last weekend, but now it's official. It's going to be Clemson-Miami in the ACC championship game here in about a month. And Miami looked good last week. Of course, the Notre Dame game hasn't been played yet here as we record this, so we'll see how well Miami plays tonight. But if Miami comes out and plays like they did against Virginia Tech and plays well against Notre Dame and they win out, I mean, Clemson's going to be in a dogfight in that ACC championship game. So the Tigers need to do a better job of putting teams away. I think that's the one apparent thing that comes away from this game today against Florida State. Clemson was a better team, but they almost let it come back to bite them again, which has kind of been a troubling trend for the Tigers here throughout the season so far.
Mike, you hit on the play of the game for me, at least. About 5 minutes left to play. So consider that Florida State was in the game technically, but completely outclassed most of the game. If you didn't see the game, it was 17-0. And the latest touchdown for FSU was a Ryan Izzo 60-yard play. And FSU just had all the momentum. They were rolling. They were getting stops on defense. And then Kelly Bryant fumbles on a quarterback keeper up the middle. Derwin James gets the recovery, and Florida State guys are just flying on the sideline. They are jumping around. That place was silent at Clemson. Florida State had all the momentum. 17-14 game after coming back from 17-0 down. Ball at midfield. First play, Florida State wants to go for the jugular, hit on a big play. James Blackman just made a bad read. Didn't see the safety. Van Smith comes over and just plays ball hawk and picks it off, brings it back for a big return, and sets up, as you said, Etienne with the touchdown that pretty much capped the game at 24-14 and finished off FSU. And as I mentioned to you, and you mentioned the text and me saying at one point that this was the Florida State team that I expected to see. And I'm not even talking pre DeAndre Francois. Once they lost him, I thought, okay, the college football playoffs out the door. But this team is so stacked. They'll go 9-3. They'll be a really good team and finish in the top 15. And they've lost games late. They've also had a couple outings, in particular the game at BC where they just didn't show up at all and lost 35-3. But Florida State, I thought was going to show up for this game, and despite the final score, they were right there to the end. But Clemson certainly had the opportunities, as you outlined, to put it away early. And if they can't do this against a much better team, whether that's, hey, South Carolina is playing pretty well. Clemson's a much better team, decidedly, but if they let South Carolina hang around, South Carolina has improved week to week and got a big win for themselves against Florida today. Clemson outrushed Florida State in this game, 227-21. They put a beat down on the line of scrimmage. They controlled the line of scrimmage, but they just made careless mistakes, and that can't happen the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think at one point in the second half, Florida State had -3 yards rushing, but they were outscoring Clemson 14-0 in the second half. So that gives you an idea of just how weird this game was. It took Clemson repeatedly shooting themselves in the foot to keep Florida State in it, and Florida State took advantage because they have the athletes to compete with Clemson. Now, whether or not they're playing up to their potential is a whole different story, and we know based on their record this year that really hasn't been the case here as we sit here in mid-November. But Florida State is a team that has athletes to compete on the outside with a team like Clemson. The fact that they were able to hang around because Clemson allowed them to be in the game wasn't a huge surprise. When it was 17-0 Clemson, that wasn't a huge surprise. So that gives you an idea of how this game ended up turning there in the second half. Clemson had opportunities late to put Florida State away. They did. James Blackman, of course, with the assist on a really, really bad turnover there after seizing the momentum there. And that was really the story of the game. Clemson was able to just do enough to get the job done. Of course, they tacked on a late inconsequential touchdown to determine the final tally. But
to some, Mike.
To some, yeah.
Inconsequential to some.
Yeah. I'm the one. I didn't bet on this game. I steered clear of it, and lucky for me, it was inconsequential, but it wasn't so lucky for others. Mark, right? But yes, anyway,
-16.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Or +16.
Yeah. So, yeah, inconsequential to some. But yeah, it ends up being at least on the scoreboard, a decisive win for Clemson. If you look at the total yards and didn't watch a single mid of this game, you're saying, okay, Clemson had control the entire time. It was a pretty easy win, statistically speaking. But when you watch the game, it was a very different story. So, a gritty effort by Florida State, ultimately not enough to get the job done. But I think hats off to Clemson for finishing it off. And, at this point in the year, you got to just kind of survive and move on. Florida State's a team that can definitely still get you because of the players they have on their roster. Even though they haven't played well all year, they got plenty of talent, 4- and 5-star players all over the field, plenty of NFL talent as well. So for Clemson, I think you're just happy to grit out a win when you didn't play particularly well.
James Blackman, 13 for 32. Nobody expects him to be a 70% passer and to be super efficient, but he's got to hit the throws that are there. And he hit the one to Izzo. I mentioned the one that he missed. To me, the play of the game, Van Smith with a pick. He just baited him and broke on the football, and that pretty much ended FSU's chances once Clemson completed the drive. But two other big plays in this game. Auden Tate on a 4th and 9, FSU in Clemson's red zone, ready to score, and they went for it on 4th and 9, and they had a well-designed play. Blackman didn't make a great throw, but it was a decent throw. It was out ahead of Tate. He should have laid out. He should have been able to, as a big-time receiver, catch that ball. Also, once they got down 10, they still had plenty of time, and he rifled one to Naquan Murray, who was wide open down the right sideline, would have taken it to the house, and it would have been a 3-point game again, and he missed him. Murray laid out, almost made a spectacular catch, but Blackman, again, doesn't need to be 70%, but needs to hit on the 3 or 4 opportunities and throw for 50% and then hit the big ones that count. He couldn't do it. An announcement during the game is that the Louisiana Monroe game for FSU that was canceled by the hurricane has been rescheduled for championship weekend. So
What do you know?
Certainly, while the rest of us are watching the ACC, SEC, Big Ten, fill in the blank championship games, it'll be Florida State trying to get to a bowl game against Louisiana Monroe. Possibly, if they can win out, they're 3-6 sitting right now with games against Florida and Delta State on the schedule next week for the Florida State Seminoles and trying to get to postseason play. So that's been added. For Clemson, it's basically a scrimmage game that they've got against, I don't even have it up here, probably Citadel. And they've got South Carolina, and that one hugely important, not to the ACC because they've got it wrapped up, but as a one-loss team to get to the college football playoff. Okay, Mike, we will be back very soon to wrap up another game in the ACC. We got Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech on the docket as well. Mike McDaniel from Inside the ACC. You got to join him right there for the very best in ACC football coverage, complete sports throughout the year, but of course, football winding down to championship weekend. Mike, we'll be back real soon.
All right, thanks, Mark.